So this week, we are so pleased to be welcoming Dr. Neal Barnard to The Nutshell. Dr. Barnard has an incredible plant-based health CV, including founding the Barnard Medical Center in Washington, D.C., which aims to make nutrition part of routine medical care, as well as working as an adjunct professor of medicine at George Washington University. He is, however, perhaps most well known to our listeners as the founder and president of the Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine, which is an organization advocating for preventative medicine, good nutrition, and higher ethical standards in research. He himself has led research studies focusing on the role of diet in problems such as diabetes, weight management, and chronic pain, and as a result has produced a number of fantastic studies and books, some of which I'm sure we'll be talking about today. So welcome to The Nutshell, Dr. Barnard.
Well, thank you. It's great to be with you today.
So, Neal, we are predominantly a nutrition podcast. We love speaking about food, and so we've been big fans of your work for many years. You've written lots of books. I think I read somewhere 21 books. Is that correct?
Oh, could be somewhere in there. Whenever I get it, whenever I kind of stumble on something that I thought that is really cool, let's let people know that's what that's about.
Absolutely. And your most recent book is called The Power Foods Diet, which we love because it highlights some of the sorts of foods that people should be eating for weight loss rather than just always focusing on the foods that aren't good for us. So we were wondering what prompted you to write it, and can you tell us a bit more about it?
Yeah, it was actually about 10 years ago. Our friends at Harvard did a cool study where they were looking at foods that seemed to be associated with weight loss. And it was really simple. They tracked a large group of people, but they found the more they ate of certain foods, the more weight they would lose. And you'd think, come on, it's got to be the opposite. If I'm eating more, I got to gain weight. But there were certain foods where specifically if you ate larger and larger and larger quantities of them, that was associated with greater and greater and greater weight loss. And it's because the foods, partly they push other things off the plate, but they would reduce the appetite or stimulate the metabolism, or in some cases they trap calories so you can't absorb them. And I thought, well, that's really cool. Instead of saying to people, don't eat this, don't eat that, you could say, eat this. And it was foods like blueberries and cruciferous vegetables, things that are healthy anyway, that had these properties. So I started looking into, well, why? What is it about, say, blueberries? And then I came across some really cool studies in the UK, the twin study, where they showed that within each twin pair, that they had 2,734 twins. And within each twin pair, the one eating the most anthocyanins, that's the color of blueberry, and strawberries and other berries, they had less abdominal fat. So others have been putting this to the test. Anyhow, our food experts like Dustin Harder and Lindsay S. Nixon said, all right, let's have at it. And they made a blueberry syrup and they put it on French toast, which was flavored with cinnamon, which also stimulates the metabolism. And we came up with, I think, 120 some power foods, I'm going to call them power foods, recipes that tested out really well, and that people liked, and that were tasty and not too many ingredients. And so I thought, this is the easiest thing ever. So I released this book, and we've just had fun with it.
Yeah, it's brilliant, and so full of recipes and ideas for actually what to eat. And patients love that when I tell them, look, there are foods that you can be eating, and it crowds out all the bad foods, doesn't it? That's the other thing. But we were wondering what your thoughts were about drugs like Ozempic, which are now becoming so popular, and whether some of the inspiration for the book was based on Ozempic.
I started working on the book way before the current kind of, if I can call it, sort of a craze for Ozempic and Wegovy began. But it does fit into the discussion, because what's the point of Ozempic? Ozempic is semaglutide. It's an injectable. And all it does is, in a synthetic way, do what your body does normally. When you eat food, your body releases something called GLP-1, which goes to the brain, and it turns down the appetite. So you're less likely to overdo it with calories. And if you go back to kind of our physiology 101, your body makes GLP-1 anyway. Mother Nature has the patent on that. Novo Nordisk doesn't have a patent. When you eat food, your digestive tract releases GLP-1 normally. And so you don't have to inject it. What Novo Nordisk makes is an injectable synthetic. So the question is, how do I use foods to tackle appetite? And you could do it in a variety of ways. One is if they're higher fiber and higher in carbohydrate and lower in fat, the energy density, the calorie density goes way down. So your appetite is satisfied a couple of hundred calories sooner than it otherwise would be, and people lose weight. Anyhow, but I don't want people to just take my word for it. We're doing studies. We're doing a huge study right now where we're looking at exactly these foods and using them as part of a completely plant-based diet. And people lose weight like crazy. They're not injecting anything, and they're doing very, very well. And we're also looking at people who are injecting those drugs, discovering that they can stop them or tail off of them. So I think we need more research in this area. But this is what we're finding. And the beauty of that is here in the United States, the average price of Ozempic or Wegovy is about $15,600 a year. The price of asparagus or beans or rice is much less. And so we're finding we can do the same thing without the drugs at all.
Yeah, and I think that's a concern, isn't it? Even if somebody does lose weight on these drugs, what's going to happen when they stop taking them?
Oh, well, yes. And that's the whole problem, is that the doctor threatens them and says, if you stop, you're going to regain your lost weight. I want you to be informed. And what that means is they've lost weight, they plateau. And then for the rest of their life, they're paying protection money to Novo Nordisk just to stop the weight regain. They're not getting any more benefit. They're just stopping weight regain. And so Novo Nordisk is just raking in money from all these people who are afraid of weight regain. We say, wait, stop it. Just forget it. People don't have an Ozempic deficiency anyway. What they've got is eating habits that are maladaptive. And let's help them with that.
Yeah. And do you think it's predominantly eating the wrong types of foods as well? There's a lot at the moment about processed foods and ultra processed foods. And we read a publication that you've actually published recently called Vegan Diet, Processed Foods and Body Weight. Can you tell us a bit more about that and how that's added to the debate?
Yes, people are beating up on processed foods because that's all fashionable. It's a mistake. And we sort of knew this anyway. The idea is that if you're eating something that's gone through a factory and been all processed, like corn turned into corn flakes, then maybe that'll increase the risk of diabetes or something like that. Well, our friends at Harvard actually looked into that, and they found that as a group, if you think of just anything that's processed, you will see increased risk of diabetes if people consume a lot of them. But if you look at which processed foods are associated with that and which ones are not, it's not the cornflakes or the breakfast cereals at all. And it's not bread and so forth. It's processed meat is the worst. Hot dogs and sausage. These things are strongly associated with diabetes risk. And processed cereals are associated with reduced risk. So you're taking a grain, you might be grinding it up, but it doesn't suddenly become unhealthy. So in our research, we do randomized trials where we bring in people and we change their diets. And what we discovered is that when people go on a plant-based diet and they throw the meat out and they throw out the dairy, they lose weight, whether they're eating processed plant-based foods or not. So it's always a good idea to get away from the animal products. Now, that said, certain kinds of processing are pretty benign, but others are not. If I'm grinding up oats into instant oatmeal, maybe I'd be better if it was old-fashioned oatmeal, but it's not bad if it's instant. But if I'm adding lots of coconut fat to it, that's really not very helpful, and and that's going to make it more fattening.
Can I just ask you here, we've talked about processed foods and obviously like processed meat, but we've also heard you talk about the fact that animal products, even things like chicken breast, which is a classic example when a patient says to me, I eat very clean, just chicken breast, and you say these aren't unprocessed foods and that they are actually also heavily processed by their nature. Can you explain what you mean by that?
Yes. An animal's body is used on a farm as a machine. The animal's body is there to take grain like corn and turn it into chicken meat or an egg. I know that sounds like a funny thing to say, but if I take corn and I'm making high fructose corn syrup, I use amylase as an enzyme to break that corn into a sweetener. The chicken's body has amylase too, and I feed the corn to the chicken and the amylase tears up the carbohydrate and absorbs the glucose. The animals' bodies are used as factories. So if someone says, well, all I eat is chicken breast, what that started out as is corn. that went into this body, and the proteins were rearranged. The fat was changed into something that's a little bit higher in saturated fat. The carbohydrate was removed. The fiber was all removed. And then you're selling something wrapped up in plastic. And it's the most highly processed food you can imagine. Same with milk. Oh, what's purer than a glass of milk? What this is you took an animal, you artificially inseminated her so that she would get pregnant. After she's pregnant, she starts making milk, and you feed her things that will then get converted into dairy protein, dairy fat, and dairy sugar. And you can pretend it's unprocessed. That's just a romantic, naive notion. The fact is the animal's body is a machine, and it's used as such. And in fact, just as machines are thrown out, a dairy cow is thrown out. In nature, she'd live to be 20. On a factory farm, she lives to be about 4, because then she's not producing enough. And so they throw her out for another machine, which is another cow. And she becomes a low-grade hamburger.
Absolutely. I think we're looking at a real need for a paradigm shift in how we see factory farming and this divide between what's a natural food and what's unnatural.
Well, I should say the people involved in these businesses are honest people. My grandpa raised cattle, and my father grew up in the cattle business, and they were honest people who didn't know anything different. This is the way they worked, and they felt that this was part of life. And for many people, it's really quite a cold bath to think about the fact that the products you're making are providing enough cholesterol and saturated fat to actually lead to diseases in the people we love, and to realize that maybe there's a different way of thinking about the animals with whom we share the planet. And a great many people are coming to those realizations, and they're making changes that are good for everybody else, but they're also good for them too.
Yeah. And speaking of paradigm shifts, I think your organization, PCRM, Physicians Committee, is a fantastic organization with so many resources, and we'd really like to promote it to our listeners. So there's your own podcast, the Exam Room podcast, information sheets, all the research that you've been doing, all the work that's evidence-based information. And I think, we both feel that it should turn anyone plant-based, not least of all health professionals. But unfortunately, society hasn't all shifted as we would have expected, and the tide has yet to turn on these beliefs. So what strategies do you have moving forwards now to not just get the message out, but influence change?
Well, it does start with information. People have to know, for example, that diabetes is not caused by eating bread. That it's caused by eating fatty foods that cause insulin resistance. That's a totally new idea for people. Or that chicken breast is not healthy, that it'll drive heart disease as well. So it starts out with information. But information is not enough, as you can tell when you see people at the pharmacy or wherever else buying cigarettes. They all know it causes cancer, but other things are intervening. So we do have really two kind of obstacles. One is industry, which continues to try to promote its products. And the other is, frankly, a certain amount of sluggishness of the human spirit, where we think, I could probably get away with eating these not so healthy foods for a while, or I'm addicted or whatever. So what we need to also do is not just have information, but have a pathway for people who have an inkling they might want to change. And so we have lots of support that we provide. We have, by the way, we have something, it's a free Zoom session at 12 o'clock in the US, 12 noon, but people from all over the world join. It's called the National Diabetes Program. And we welcome people from all over the world. And we just talk about a healthy diet and answer their questions live. And we have many, many, many programs like this. We have about 400 or 500 Food for Life instructors who do classes around the world. And getting the word out is really, really important. And by the way, that's why I'm grateful to you, because you're getting the word out. And somebody might tune in thinking, I wonder what this is about today. And they leave empowered, and they share what they've learned with some other people. So that's really, I think, the most important thing, is to continue to get the word and practical advice into people's hands.
Yeah, absolutely. And am I right in thinking you're doing that for physicians as well in New York? Can you tell us a bit more about what's happened there?
Yeah, we do it everywhere. But in New York, we got some legislation passed that says actually the state government of New York now gathers nutrition material they think doctors ought to know about. Imagine that. And they put that into their hands. So that's good. There's still a lot of noise out there. You still have the pharmaceutical industry pushing their stuff with continuing medical education, but now we're on more of a level playing field.
Brilliant. And how has that been received, can I ask?
They love it. I can't tell you how many doctors are kind of teetering on the edge of burnout. And because, they feel like a factory. It's every 15 minutes I got another person where I got to hand out pills and I don't have time to talk to them about diet, Stop. We have information for you about how it works, and we've got a mechanism for you to refer them to people who will do that teaching, and then you can take the credit for it. And the doctors suddenly feel that they've got power that they can share with the patient.
That's brilliant, isn't it? Getting into medical schools is the first. For me and Claire, it was a case of postgraduate education, but just to see it now at undergraduate level is really exciting.
Great. So with your own journey, what we understand is that you had what perhaps today sounds like a very reasonable and compassionate response to the use of live dogs for medical education. Now, can you recap for our listeners on that beginning and what's since been achieved in ending the use of animals in medical education?
Sure. I was in medical school at the George Washington University School of Medicine, which is here in Washington, D.C. And I was sitting in my pharmacology class, and one day the professor said, okay, everybody form your groups because we need you to be in groups of 4 to 6, and each group gets a dog. And we thought, okay, here it comes. We knew about this. There's a thing called Dog Lab, which was sort of half education and half hazing. The idea is you take a dog and the dogs come in. Every group's got a dog, and the dogs are nervous and like, what's going to happen? And then you put the dog up on the table and you try to calm her down. Then you tape her down and you put in an IV, and then you start following the lab instructions, which are infuse norepinephrine. And her heartbeat races, and you write that down and you do an EKG tracing. And this is not particularly educational because you already knew that's what would happen because you'd studied this in the class. And then the lab manual says give propranolol. So you give that as a beta blocker so her heart goes down. And you knew that too because you had studied that. And then different schools do it different ways, but one of the instructions can be to exsanguinate the dog. And what that means is that you draw blood out and you keep drawing it out. And then after the last few drops of blood come out of this animal's body, she's not breathing anymore. And the one student looks to another and they say, she dead? And then they'll say, I think. And then the instructor will come by and go, she's dead, put her in the bag outside the door. And at the end of that day, there's this huge line of trash bags outside the door. And the students are all at home. And they're explaining to their girlfriends, boyfriends, their parents, whoever they're eating with, what they did. And their family goes, what? What? Why would you do that? Anyway, so the instructor said, this is what was happening next week. And I was not a rebellious, cocky student, but I knew I was smart enough to not need to do this, and I just said, I'm not going to participate. And he said, well, I'm not asking you, because it was a requirement. And just as the words are coming out of his mouth, the student next to me said, well, he's not doing the dog lab, and I'm not doing the dog lab. So we had a movement of 2 students who were going to not do this lab. But anyhow, I realized to tell you the truth, there's 2 deaths that day. One is the dogs. The other is the part of the student's brain that says, I'm going to stick up for what's right, even if it's against the rules. I'm going to stick up for being decent or being kind or supporting life in my patients or even in an animal. And I realized that we needed to get rid of these exercises. And so when I formed the Physicians Committee, which I did after I finished my residency, one of the first things we took on was these animal labs, both for the animals and also for the students and the doctors they're going to become. And it was challenging at first. Some of the professors weren't too keen on this, but on the other hand, many were. And bit by bit, we made progress. And as of 2016, every use of animals in every medical school up through the MD degree in the US and Canada has been completely eliminated. And that's good.
It's incredible, because I think when you hear that story and you think, of course, you think about the animal, but you also think about people being asked to do that just because they're medical students, just because they've decided to study medicine. And, that it was so embedded as such a traditional idea that it needed to be done is incredible, looking back on that on a relatively recent time. Did you have to lobby each institution one by one, or how did you actually get that kind of massive change? And maybe, can you tell us about what you've learned about how to bring about these kind of changes which go against very traditional ideas?
Some of them were quite easy. At Harvard Medical School, a group of medical students came to see us, and they said, we don't want to do this dog lab, and frankly, we don't want anyone to do it. We want to stop it. And so I contacted the course instructor, who had actually just sort of inherited the dog lab from a previous instructor, and he wasn't that keen on it. And he devised an alternative where the students went into the operating room, and they saw the same drugs being used in the course of clinical care with better monitoring than you'd ever have in a dog lab. And the students would go in and they would see it and they would write it up, and they felt empowered because they could see how it would fit into their practice. And you're not killing anybody, you're saving somebody. So that was super easy. And the instructor became kind of a hero for improving medical education at Harvard. And so then Henry Heimlich, who was the inventor of the Heimlich maneuver, he was very taken with this. And so he worked with us to create a video to send to all the medical schools saying, you should be doing this. So that was helpful. But there were some sticklers. Johns Hopkins University, which you would think, it's a huge research institution, you would think they could figure out a better way. They said, well, okay, we won't kill dogs anymore. We'll use pigs instead. Oh, like, come on, people. You can do better. And they came up with an argument. They said that killing a pig helps you understand the sanctity of life. I'm not making this up. And we had a long, drawn-out battle with them for the longest period of time. And I had to say, if you think that you can't understand the sanctity of life without killing somebody, you've got to do better. And finally, they did quit. And when they quit, there was one remaining school, and they said, we don't want to be the last one. It was the University of Tennessee at Chattanooga. And they said, we don't want to be the last one. We'll just quit. And that was it. So, but what I've learned a couple things. The first thing is wishing doesn't bring results. You've got to work on it, and you've got to fight until you win. And sometimes it's easy, but sometimes it takes a long time. The other thing is, as anybody knows, if you ever looked under your sink or in the nether regions of your refrigerator, mildew grows. If you don't pay attention, things come back. So in 2020, I think it was, Duke University in North Carolina was having trouble getting cadavers. They were using cadavers for surgery training, which is what a lot of medical schools do, and that's good. A person is given their body for use after death, and so you can dissect them and so forth. They couldn't get cadavers because of COVID had come in, and there were all sorts of transport restrictions. So they said, I got an idea, let's use pigs. And so my point is, if you're not attentive, people will bring back bad ideas, and we were able to stop them rather rapidly. But there we are. You've got to work at it, and you've got to push them. But if you're right, it really helps. You're going to win.
So you're having to work to keep things at the level they are. But what is still left to do in terms of changing things in research? Because PCRM is all about ethical research, isn't it? So yes. What is still left to do? Do you have a set of plans going forwards?
Yeah, we sure do. We're not done with medical education, really. I mentioned that it was all gone up to the MD degree, but what about residencies? 78% of surgical residencies have stopped using animals, but we've got that other 22%, and we're working on them, and we're going to win there too, but it takes time. It helps us that the vast majority have stopped. With regard to emergency medicine, the numbers are sort of similar. Most have stopped using animals, but a few do. With regard to trauma training, there are hundreds of them that have discontinued animal use, but there is one that still uses animals. It's in Fargo, North Dakota, which is where I grew up. To my embarrassment, they are the one that is still using other animals to teach trauma training, and the animals get pretty beaten up, as you can imagine. And there's no excuse for it because we've got great simulators. Now, the beauty of the simulators is it doesn't have pig anatomy. It's got human anatomy, and you can use it over and over and over, and you can do it again tomorrow and next week, whereas the animal's dead. The animal's gone. And you can't get that repetition, which you need sort of that muscle memory when you're doing, cricothyrotomy or whatever it is. You need to be fast, and the simulators allow you to build that up. So anyhow, we're going to win on all these, but you've got to keep going. And then with regard to animal testing, product testing of cosmetic products or household products or pharmaceuticals, there are terrific non-animal methods. The regulators need to understand them. The people using them need to understand them. So we do hold educational sessions for them. They love it, but it's kind of a gradual process. And with regard to research per se, although we've made huge progress, and in our research, we would never consider using animals, both for ethical reasons, and frankly, it's much more cool to be able to look into the human body with scanning techniques and see the changes there. But there are a lot of people who do use animals, and I'm sorry to say they are rewarded for it, because they can go to a journal like Nutrients or Frontiers in Nutrition that says, give us an author fee, $3,000. We'll publish your article, and we won't really bother paying much attention at the ethical guidelines that you're supposed to follow. And so Nutrients, to pick a real example, it has published awful things. There were researchers who wanted to see if saffron was an antidepressant. Well, there's some literature on saffron, the spice, having antidepressant effects. So they took mice, and mice won't eat that much saffron. So they gavage them. You put this tube down their throat and jam the saffron in. And they also won't tell you if they're depressed or not. So they I'm not making this up, they use the forced swim test. You throw them in water and you time how long they struggle before they give up. And that's supposed to show you their joie de vivre. And Nutrients published this, saying, gee, it looks like if you gavage mice with saffron and stick them in water, they'll struggle a little bit longer with the saffron. You think, stop. Why don't you just give it to human beings and see if they feel better? You could do that. So anyway, these journals and the people who publish in them have a big conflict of interest. They want to throw things on their CV. They want results that they can publish regardless of whether they're ethical or appropriate. So we have an uphill battle with some of them.
Okay, so you mentioned the simulators and, as ways of not using animals. Are there any other sort of exciting research methods in play at the moment? We've been hearing a lot about organ chips.
Yeah, at Harvard and elsewhere, they're using organs on a chip, and it started out kind of simplistically. In a way, you might say you could take skin, you could put it on a chip, or you could take parts of an artery, and you put them in a little tiny chip as big as a fingernail, and you could put compounds through it, and you could see how it affects those various tissues. But then people got fancier, because when compounds go through your body, they're metabolized in the liver to other compounds. So you can now process things through liver cells without an animal's body, and you can have compounds that come from them, and you can test them in all kinds of organoids, and they can be human relevant. It's not a rat. It's not a mouse. These can be human cells. And so anyway, it's extremely exciting. But some things are really just kind of quite mundane. In our research, we're working with Yale University, where we have people with type 2 diabetes, and we put them on a vegan diet. And in the old days, a person would have said, well, I want to find out what the diet will do to their liver fat. Will it help reduce their accumulating liver fat? Because if we do that, then their insulin resistance will get better. So what do? You feed it to animals, and then you take a liver biopsy and so forth. Wait, we feed human beings. At Yale University, the patients lie on a table. They go into a magnetic resonance spectroscopy machine. And in that very morning, I can tell you exactly how much liver fat they have. Well, the person is awake and fine. And I don't have to extrapolate from an animal. I don't have to kill anybody. And the other piece of this, I have to say, when you're a researcher and you're killing animals, frankly, your adolescent daughter hates you because of what you do. And so do all the people who work for you, because you've given them the job of dispatching the animals, and you feel kind of crummy about it. Then you've got results that the journal reviewers kind of beat you up on because they don't exactly apply. And with what we do, the participants love it. I mean, they are changing, they are improving, they are feeling power. Our participants work with them, they love it, and we have a lot easier time publishing our work in medical journals because there isn't any question as to whether it relates to human biology.
Absolutely. And no one wants to go through a liver biopsy, I think, in the aid of any kind
Tell
of
me about it.
research or diagnosis. The other thing that, it's been in the news very recently is that things don't seem to be going too well in the area of xenotransplantation. So where you take sort of a pig's heart and you transplant it into a human being to try and solve the shortage in availability of human organs. So given that things are not going well, do you think we're actually close to seeing the end of these kind of attempts at transplanting animal organs?
I don't think so. I think they are driven by greed and a certain amount of dishonesty. By that I mean that organ transplantation is an important thing. And it is true that there's a shortage of organs. And so animals have been proposed for heart transplants, for kidney transplants, for liver transplants. And the people who do these things will say, well, we don't have enough human organs, so we really need to use an animal. And yes, there's a huge problem with rejection, but we will grow pigs with certain genetic changes. And hopefully the rejection won't be quite as severe. And you can understand that. But what they're not saying is that they're not really making any effort to solve the organ donation problem. Most of the transplantable organs are just buried in the cemetery because no one bothered to have good programs to allow those people to make a provision to say, when I pass, let me save a life by donating whatever. Now, there are a lot of people who do, but we're not really working very hard. And part of the reason, when I say greed, these are companies that are pushing commercial products. In the same way as people push pork for bacon, they also raise special pigs and hope to make a lot of money using them as a commercial product. Their Achilles heels are, A, it often doesn't work. Most of the people die. B, it is phenomenally expensive to do this. And C, nobody likes the idea of having to rely on animals for this. The obvious reason is the compassionate one, but the other reason is we have learned that you end up having viruses in animals that you kind of thought you had screened them pretty well, but then you discover there was one that you missed. It's really a very cumbersome way to solve a problem.
Absolutely. And I think it's a good moment to just say for any of our listeners that are interested in reducing animal suffering to make sure that you're registered as an organ donor.
Oh, I'm glad you said that. It's really easy to do.
We were going to ask you about a survey that PCRM published actually this year in February about the beliefs of US adults in regards to nutritional importance of things like meat, dairy and eggs, particularly when it comes to protein. Can you tell us a bit more about the survey and what your reactions were really to that?
Yeah, we did a survey. We did it in January and released it in the following month. And we polled a large sample of American adults. And we asked them about protein. And what we found is that 87% of them thought that to get enough protein, it's important to have meat in your diet. And we thought, oh my goodness sakes, we're not really making much progress, are we? But we then prompted them with another question, which is, can you get adequate protein from plant-based foods? And then on reflection, I'll say, yeah, you can. But it's sort of a bare majority of Americans who will say, yes, you can. So our educational process is not yet finished. People still imagine they need meat for protein. A great many people do.
Moving on from that, we wanted to ask you a little bit about how you talk to patients, because we're always looking at ways that we can incorporate other people's good experience into our own work. And we've certainly heard you give a few examples about how you've persuaded a particular patient to make a change to their diet. And then when they've had positive results, you've been able to move on to, really nail the evidence by doing a larger study. And one example of that was talking about period pains. So we would love to know more about how you're inspiring individuals when you're in the consulting room to have enough confidence and trust in you to actually take that step to go plant-based.
It's kind of funny that you mentioned that. There have been a few cases where there was just an individual situation where we had the idea that maybe a diet change could help. The point about menstrual pain was one where a young woman needed help. And I reasoned, which is my fancy word for I guessed, that a diet change could help, simply because there were some studies at Tufts University that showed that when women would increase their fiber intake and reduce their fat intake, their estrogen levels would come down. And what they were trying to do was reduce estrogen so they could reduce breast cancer risk. But I thought, well, what's menstrual pain? It's the endometrial lining is thickening up under the influence of estrogen. Or you might have endometriosis, which is endometrial cells around the abdomen that are growing under the influence of estrogen. So with this one particular case, I suggested a high fiber, low fat, completely vegan diet. So there's no animal fat at all. And it was effectively a cure for her. But I thought, well, that's one patient. So we did a randomized trial and we showed it worked. And I had a similar case with regard to menopausal symptoms, where a woman had a dramatic benefit from what we had suggested. And we published some findings in a couple of publications in large groups of people, showing that it really does work if you do it the right way. But your question's a good one. Like, how does this work in the consultation room? And first of all, I don't try to persuade anybody, and I don't try to challenge their skepticism. I think people are right to be skeptical. They've tried diets, they've had issues. What we do is we inform them of how it works, and we make a recommendation, which would be something like, you want to lose some weight. Calories are in the oily and fatty foods that you're eating. And if we get away from animal fat and fatty foods in general, you're going to lose weight without limiting portions and da-da-da-da-da. And why don't you see our dietitian? The doctor's done. That's all you have to do. Then our dietitian says, best diet, plant-based diet. Would you like to give it a try for a little while? I don't know, maybe, says the patient. They don't have to be convinced. So what we'll do is we'll say, well, take a week. Don't change your diet for this week. Just explore it and kind of think what you would eat. And so we give them a piece of paper and we say, write down on this paper plant-based foods that you think you actually would enjoy. Test them out and let's come back in a week and let's talk. So they come back a week later and they've got a huge long list of all the things that are plant-based that they didn't think of, like cereal in a bowl or oatmeal or spaghetti with, instead of meat sauce, they put tomato sauce on, or they went to the Mexican place and had the bean burrito. It was kind of good. Or they made chili with, instead of meat, they put in beans. They got a million things. So we say, okay, great. These are all plant-based foods. Yeah. Do you like them? Sure. Fine. I've stocked up. Okay. Step 2, eat those foods. For the next 3 weeks, go ahead and eat the foods that you've identified. That's it. Yeah. Don't eat any animal products. We're going to be vegan. And for 3 weeks, we're going to do it. And then we keep in touch every week because they got an issue. Like I went to a restaurant and I wasn't sure what to eat, or my girlfriend's brother makes fun of me. And what do I say? They got some little thing that's bugging them. But we solve those problems. Within 3 weeks, A, they're losing weight. B, if they've got diabetes, their blood sugar is falling. C, they're not starving. They for the first time in their life, a diet doesn't mean hunger. It means I'm just putting a different topping on my spaghetti. Is like real easy. And they feel power because it's easy and it's working for them. So we say, well, let's just keep going. But we never confront skepticism or anything like that. If they are right to want to see for themselves how it works. They are so pumped up and enthusiastic. And they then kind of exude this to all the people they live with, and they want to do it. So we're doing studies right now where we're doing this in large groups of people. They don't have to be in front of you. You can reach them on Zoom. You can do it as a group, and we answer questions together, and it's extremely empowering for people.
I love that. And I know that obviously at the Barnard Medical Center, you've got the right dietitian that you're referring them to, because sometimes our problem in the NHS is that we give them the start of the advice and we send them off to the dietitian, and the dietitian may not follow what we're thinking. You've also got all these books that you've written on so many different medical areas. And I know that sometimes you might give them a copy of the book maybe and put the Post-it note in there and say, I think this is really relevant to you.
Well, that's a trick you use with a loved one. My mother taught me this. My dear mother had a high cholesterol level that she would do nothing about. And I mean, I would suggest to her that she really ought to stop eating animal products. My mother grew up in a kind of a cattle country, USA. And she did have a high cholesterol level, and she wouldn't pay any attention to me, which I attribute to the fact that I am her third born child. You pay a lot of attention to the first child and some to the second one, but you can look in our family photo album. And after child number 1, there's almost no pictures at all, because you've seen what a dribbling toddler looks like. You're not taking their advice. Even if your third-born son has been to medical school and has been an NIH grantee, your mother will not pay any attention. So anyhow, I took a book, gave it to my mom. What you do is you say, Mom, I love you so much. I thought of you when I read page 153. And once again on page 164. That book is not going to stay unread. She's going to tear it open and she's going to read it. And she's going to call you a week later saying, I read that book 6 times. I can't see why you thought of me. And you say, well, I didn't really think of you on that page exactly. I just thought if you really read the book, you would give it a try. And she has. Anyway, my dear mother went vegan. Her cholesterol level fell so much that her doctor called her up and said, you got to come back and repeat the testing, because I don't believe the testing machines here. I think they've gone foul. And she then became a big believer. But you got to resort to a little trickery sometimes to get your dear mom to take your advice.
Yeah, absolutely. I go with you. My mum has also gone vegan in the last few years, which is fantastic. And I didn't have to write a book in order for her to do that. But thinking about your current work, are you working on a book at the moment? Or another question would be, is there any area that you would like to see a plant-based book on, but that you might actually have to push another expert to take on?
Yeah, I'm always working on something, but you never quite know what's going to really mature. We're very active in research, and quite often when we make new findings, we do like to release books. And sort of my big thing now is to take our findings and make them. See, I'm the science guy. I'm not really the food guy. So I do have to partner with people who can make things delicious and fun, and a little bit of food porn in there with pictures. That's really an important part of it too. But there are all kinds of areas that remain to be teased out. Everyone likes to talk about the gut microbiome, but nobody really has a clue as to what we're really doing with it. It's astounding when you read research reports on it. I don't think people really have a good clue. With regard to brain health, there is a lot of good finding, but there's been a fair amount of crashing and burning with some of the diets that have been tested, particularly Mediterranean diets. A Mediterranean diet sounds very sexy, but it is pretty much a waste of time. It's just a mixture of good things, like vegetables and fruits, and bad things, like chicken and fish and greasy stuff, that really limit its effectiveness. So all these areas need to be, I think, explored a bit further.
We're excited to hear what's going to come next from yourself, Dr. Barnard, and from PCRM. And on that note, we always normally end this podcast with asking our guests what they're having for dinner, but we are changing slightly to think a bit more about plant-based foods in the context of seasonality and the environment and trying to keep things local. So what we're going to ask you instead of your dinner tonight is, do you have a favourite plant that is currently in season that you like to eat? And can you tell us a bit more about that?
What a great question. I have to say that lately I've been super taken with the whole berry group. So that's blueberries and strawberries and raspberries and all their big cousins. But I'm a complete idiot when it comes to anything related to the actual botany of it. I just know about what they do in your body. So I am never clear on what's in season. So I go over to the store and I stumble in and I try to figure it out. And if I'm not sure, I've discovered that they have frozen ones that might have been left there since they were in season. And they can stick around for a really long period of time, and they have saved my life more than once.
That's a very good trick. What do you do with your frozen berries that our listeners might be able to emulate?
Well, I mean, this is not rocket science. I mean, if let's say you're making oatmeal porridge or something like that, or a cold cereal, I mean, just throw them in. They're going to go fine. A lot of people are big in the smoothie world, and you can do that too. Do you just find places where they kind of augment what you're having? Or frankly, if I've gone out for a good, nice run, I'll just take some blueberries. I just stuff them in my mouth. They're just there to kind of cure what ails you.
Yeah, it's funny you should say that because do you remember, Claire, I told you about that recipe I did with oats and banana. I just mash oats and banana and make them into little rounds and put them in the oven.
Mm-hmm.
And they're little nice chewy things. I actually put some frozen blueberries in them the other day and that worked really well as well.
Yeah, aren't they great?
Claire, any frozen blueberries or seasonal berry recipes?
Seasonal things. Well, I knew we were going to talk about this, so I was like looking, okay, what's in season? But I like the idea of the acceptable preserving of things, and I think that counts as eating in season as well, really, doesn't it? So we're never down on frozen vegetables. There were so many you could have picked, Neal. There's beetroot, there's spinach at the moment, cabbage. Artichokes. We did say something about artichokes earlier, didn't we? I love artichokes, so it's great that they're going. I'll be able to pick them up and they'll know that we're eating seasonally.
Well, I don't know what to do about seasonality in some ways because human beings started out our sojourn on Earth, if I can put it this way, somewhere in Eastern Africa, and a long time ago, people got restless. People are always making bad decisions, like let me leave this wonderful African climate and let me move up to Europe and over to Asia and across the Bering Strait and let me settle in New Jersey or North Dakota or something like that. Now, I'm going to say that was a mistake because, that's where I grew up, in North Dakota. It's cold. In January and February and March, there isn't anything seasonal except for snow. Now, the squirrels were smarter because they had been burying nuts, but we human beings have no clue. So if I'm going to eat seasonally, I want to go back to where my great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandparents were, to Africa, and find out what's there now, because that's what I want to eat.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Right. Well, we're going to conclude things there. It is such an inspiration to have had this conversation with you. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Well, thank you. It's been great talking with you today.